I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid that I was disappearing, one memory at a time. The terrifying part wasn't the headaches or the dizzy spells. It wasn't waking up in unfamiliar rooms of my own house, or forgetting conversations I'd had just hours earlier. It was watching the people I loved exchange those quiet, pity-filled glances whenever I spoke. The kind of look people give someone they've already decided can't be trusted. At first, they said I was overworked. Then they said I was burned out. Before long, they were whispering words like anxiety, depression, and early-onset dementia. Eventually, even I started wondering if they were right. Until the day I discovered that the woman bringing me homemade soup every week wasn't trying to save my life. She was slowly poisoning me. And the worst part? She wasn't a stranger. She was my husband's sister. The woman who smiled every time she hugged me already knew exactly how she planned to steal everything I had spent my entire life building. If my best friend hadn't noticed one tiny detail everyone else overlooked, I wouldn't be here telling this story. I wouldn't have uncovered the lies. I wouldn't have exposed the betrayal. And I certainly wouldn't have learned that the most dangerous people aren't always the ones who hate you openly. Sometimes they're the ones who call you family. Before I tell you what happened, let me ask you something. Have you ever known something was terribly wrong, but no one believed you? If you have, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what country you call home. I read your stories, and they remind me that none of us are ever truly alone. And if you enjoy emotional stories about betrayal, resilience, and justice, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Now, let me tell you how the people I trusted most nearly destroyed my life. My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and this is the story of how everyone believed I was losing my mind, when in reality, someone was trying to steal it. People think success protects you. They imagine that if you own a beautiful home, run a thriving business, and have a husband who kisses you goodbye every morning, life must be perfect. I used to believe that too. At 41, I owned one of Charleston's most respected interior design firms. My company specialized in restoring historic homes across South Carolina, and after nearly 2 decades of hard work, I had finally built a reputation I was proud of. Nothing about my success came easily. I worked weekends, skipped vacations, pulled all-night design sessions while everyone else slept. Every project I completed felt like another brick laid in the foundation of the life I had dreamed of since college. 5 years earlier, I married Grant Whitmore. Grant wasn't the type of man who demanded attention. He was calm, dependable, and kind. As a financial consultant, he spent his days helping clients build secure futures, and his evenings sitting with me on our back porch overlooking the Ashley River. Life with him felt peaceful. Or at least, I believed it did. There was only one complication. His elder sister, Vanessa. Vanessa had always been deeply involved in Grant's life. She called almost every day, dropped by without warning, joined nearly every Sunday dinner. She was so present that sometimes it felt less like she was visiting and more like she lived with us. I never complained. I told myself they were simply a close family. Besides, Vanessa always arrived carrying something thoughtful. Fresh flowers, homemade desserts, a pot of soup, a casserole she insisted we'd love. She never referred to me as her sister-in-law. She always called me her sister. At the time, I thought I was lucky. Looking back, those acts of kindness were the perfect disguise. The first sign that something was wrong came on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I arrived at my office nearly half an hour late for a client presentation. Being late wasn't unusual. What terrified me was that I had absolutely no memory of scheduling the meeting. My assistant, Claire, met me outside the conference room. "Eleanor, are you okay?" "Of course." She looked uncertain. "You've asked me 3 times what today's date is." I laughed it off. Everyone forgets things. I blamed long hours, too much coffee, and stress. But then it happened again. A few days later, I walked into a grocery store and couldn't remember why I was there. The following week, I forgot the password I'd used for years. One afternoon, while driving home from work, I became completely disoriented. The roads I'd driven hundreds of times suddenly felt unfamiliar. I eventually made it home, but my hands were shaking so badly, I could barely unlock the front door. Grant wrapped his arms around me. "Babe," he whispered gently, "you're exhausting yourself." I wanted to believe him, because the alternative was terrifying. A few days later, Vanessa arrived carrying homemade chicken soup. "I made extra," she said with her usual warm smile. You need someone to take care of you." I thanked her. The soup tasted incredible. That night I woke with a pounding headache unlike anything I'd ever experienced. By morning, I could barely stand without the room spinning around me. Dr. Amelia Grant ordered several routine tests. Everything came back normal. "Stress can do remarkable things to the body," she told me kindly. "Get some rest." So I did. I reduced my workload, canceled meetings, started sleeping earlier. Nothing improved. Instead, everything became worse. I forgot conversations I'd had only hours before, lost important paperwork, missed appointments. One afternoon, during a meeting with longtime clients, I forgot one of their names halfway through introducing myself. The silence in that room felt unbearable. I had spent years building my reputation. Now I couldn't even trust my own memory. That evening I cried in the shower where I thought Grant couldn't hear me. When I came downstairs, he was waiting. "Eleanor," he said softly, "maybe it's time to see a neurologist." My stomach tightened. "You think I'm losing my mind?" He immediately shook his head. "I think something's wrong." So do I. Neither of us realized just how right that was. As the weeks passed, Vanessa became even more involved in our lives. She insisted on cooking dinner several nights a week. She brought herbal teas she claimed would calm my nerves. Fresh smoothies packed with what she called brain-boosting ingredients. She even reorganized my kitchen because she believed clutter increased anxiety. Every gesture looked thoughtful, every visit seemed caring, and every time she came, I became sicker. I simply hadn't connected the two, yet. Soon my condition started affecting my business. I forgot to send signed contracts, transferred the same payment twice to a vendor before my accountant caught the mistake. Employees began gently reminding me about meetings I'd scheduled myself. Clients started directing questions to my project managers instead of me. No one intended to hurt me. They thought they were helping, but every reminder chipped away at my confidence. Eventually, I stopped trusting myself. I began writing everything down: appointments, passwords, phone calls, even ordinary conversations. If I didn't write it down, I was terrified I'd forget. One afternoon, I stood in my own office staring at two employees who had worked beside me for nearly 4 years. Their names disappeared from my mind. Completely. They looked at me with concern. I looked back at them with fear, because in that moment, I truly believed I was losing my mind. The drive home felt endless. By the time I reached the house, I'd almost convinced myself that everyone else was right. Maybe it really was stress. Maybe I needed to step away from my company. Maybe I wasn't capable anymore. Grant was waiting when I walked through the door. "What happened?" I tried to answer. Instead, I burst into tears. I forgot my employees' names. He held me tightly. "We'll figure this out." For a moment, I believed him. Then the doorbell rang. Grant sighed. That must be Vanessa. She walked in carrying 2 casserole dishes and a bouquet of lilies. "I made dinner," she announced brightly. She hugged me tightly. "Oh, sweetheart," she said. "Grant told me you had another rough day." I looked at my husband. "You told her?" I was worried. Vanessa squeezed my hand. "You don't have to go through this alone." Those words comforted me then. Today, they make my skin crawl. That evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Vanessa casually brought up cognitive decline. "My coworker's mother started forgetting little things too," she said sympathetically. "Thankfully, they caught it early." I lowered my eyes to my plate. Was that how everyone saw me now? As someone slowly disappearing? That night, I barely slept. Around 3 in the morning, I wandered downstairs and found the containers Vanessa had packed neatly inside our refrigerator, each one labeled in her careful handwriting. Wednesday lunch, Thursday soup, eat me first. I smiled sadly. How lucky I was, I thought, to have family who cared so much. I had no idea that every container in that refrigerator was bringing me one step closer to losing everything. And somewhere behind every warm smile, every comforting hug, and every homemade meal, someone was counting on me, believing I was the problem. Someone was waiting for the day I would stop trusting my own mind. The weeks that followed became the darkest period of my life. Every morning I woke up wondering what part of myself I would lose that day. Would I forget another client? Would I get lost driving home again? Or would I wake up one morning and fail to recognize the woman staring back at me in the mirror? The fear was constant. It followed me into every meeting, every conversation, every quiet moment when I was alone with my thoughts. My business, The company I had spent 18 years building from nothing began to suffer. Employees stopped coming directly to me for final decisions. Instead, they quietly checked with one another first. Clients who had trusted my judgment for years started directing complicated questions to my senior designers. No one was trying to be cruel. They thought they were protecting me. But every concerned smile reminded me that people no longer saw the confident woman they once admired. They saw someone they believed was slowly fading away. And the worst part, I had started believing it too. One Friday afternoon, I attended a networking luncheon at one of Charleston's historic hotels. Normally, events like these energized me. I loved meeting homeowners with century-old houses and hearing stories that inspired future projects. That afternoon, I could barely concentrate. Conversations blurred together. Faces felt strangely unfamiliar. Then someone across the table smiled and asked a simple question. "Eleanor, how long have you and Grant been married now?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. I knew I loved my husband. I knew our wedding had been beautiful. But for one horrifying moment, I couldn't remember whether we'd been married for 3 years or 5. The answer was there somewhere. I just couldn't reach it. An awkward silence settled over the table. Finally, I forced a laugh. My husband would probably disown me for forgetting. Everyone laughed politely. So did I. But inside, I was terrified. By the time I returned home, I was emotionally exhausted. The smell of garlic greeted me before I even stepped inside. Vanessa was already cooking. "There you are," she said cheerfully. "I made your favorite pasta." I managed a weak smile. "You really didn't have to." "Nonsense." She walked over and hugged me. "Family takes care of each other." At that moment, I still believed she meant it. Dinner was quiet. Mostly because I had no energy left to pretend everything was normal. Grant kept asking how I felt. Vanessa kept insisting I needed more rest. Every answer somehow led back to stress, or anxiety, or burnout. Never once did anyone suggest that something else might be happening. After dinner, another headache hit. It came so suddenly that I had to grip the kitchen counter to stay upright. The room spun around me. My stomach twisted violently. I barely reached the bathroom before I started vomiting. Grant rushed in moments later. "Eleanor?" "I'm okay," I whispered, even though I clearly wasn't. Vanessa appeared behind him with a look of perfect concern. "Oh, sweetheart." She gently rubbed my back. "This is exactly what stress can do." I nodded weakly, because I didn't know what else to believe. The next morning, my assistant called. "Eleanor?" Her voice sounded unusually careful. "Their board wants to know if you're planning to take some time off." My heart sank. "They ask that? They're worried about you." After hanging up, I sat on the back porch overlooking the Ashley River for nearly an hour. The water moved peacefully. Boats drifted past. Birds skimmed across the surface. Everything around me looked calm. Yet inside, I felt like my entire world was collapsing. For the first time since starting my company, I wondered whether everyone would be better off if I stepped away. The thought frightened me, because it didn't feel like me. It felt like someone who had already given up. A week later, I had lunch with my best friend, Hannah Brooks. We had met during our sophomore year at Clemson University and had been inseparable ever since. Hannah had seen every version of me. The broke college student, the struggling entrepreneur, the woman who celebrated landing her first major client with 2 slices of cheap pizza because that was all I could afford. If anyone knew me, it was Hannah. The moment I sat down, she frowned. "You've lost weight." "I've just been busy." "No." She looked directly into my eyes. "You're scared." That single word broke me. Tears spilled down my face before I could stop them. "I think I'm losing my mind." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "No." Her answer was immediate. "Certain." I blinked. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean I don't believe it." I stared at her. She smiled gently. "Eleanor, you've always forgotten birthdays." Despite everything, I laughed. "You've misplaced your keys more times than I can count." I laughed again. "But you've never forgotten who you are." Her expression turned serious. "This isn't normal." For nearly an hour, I told her everything. The headaches, the dizziness, the nausea, the memory lapses, the doctor's appointments, the board questioning my ability to run my own company, Vanessa bringing food almost every day, Grant becoming more worried by the week. When I finished, Hannah remained silent for several seconds. Then she asked one question. When do you usually feel the worst? I frowned. I don't know. Think about it. I closed my eyes. When did they usually happen? Suddenly, a pattern began to form. Usually, I opened my eyes. It's after Vanessa visits. Neither of us spoke. Finally, I laughed nervously. That sounds ridiculous. Does it? She's family. I know. And she cooks for us because she's trying to help. Hannah nodded slowly. I'm not saying she's hurting you, but I am saying something doesn't make sense. I felt uncomfortable. You're asking me to suspect someone who's done nothing but care for me. I'm asking you to pay attention. She leaned forward. For 1 week, I don't want you to eat anything Vanessa brings you. I stared at her. I can't do that. Why not? Because she'll notice. Then don't tell her. I looked away. It feels wrong. If she's innocent, Hannah said softly, you'll never have to tell her. And if she isn't, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. After several moments, I nodded. 1 week. 1 week, she repeated. And save every meal she brings. I frowned. Save it? In sealed containers. Don't throw it away. Don't eat it. Just keep it. I still thought the idea was absurd. But Hannah wasn't an emotional person. She was practical, thoughtful. She never jumped to conclusions. If she was asking me to do this, she had a reason. The opportunity came sooner than expected. The very next afternoon, Vanessa arrived carrying a freshly baked chicken pot pie. I know you've been struggling to eat, she said with a warm smile. So I made something comforting. She hugged me before placing the pie on the kitchen counter. It smelled incredible. Exactly the way homemade food should. After she left, I stood there staring at it for several minutes. I felt guilty, ashamed, almost paranoid. Finally, I divided one portion into a clean glass container, labeled it with the date, placed it inside the freezer. Then I ordered takeout instead. That evening, I waited. An hour passed. Then another. No headache, no dizziness, no nausea. By bedtime, I still felt perfectly normal. I convinced myself it was only a coincidence, nothing more. The next morning I woke before my alarm. For a few seconds, I lay completely still, waiting. Waiting for the pounding headache, waiting for the dizziness, waiting for the nausea that had become part of my daily routine. Nothing happened. I slowly sat up. My mind felt clear, clearer than it had in months. Downstairs, Grant smiled as I poured myself a cup of coffee. You look better today. I actually feel better. He smiled with relief. I told you rest would help. I smiled back. But deep inside, I knew I hadn't rested any more than usual. There had only been one difference. I hadn't eaten Vanessa's food. Throughout the day, I felt stronger. I answered emails without making mistakes. Finished a complicated design proposal in record time. Remembered every detail of an important client meeting. When the meeting ended, Claire smiled. It's good to have you back. Back? The word stayed with me. Had I really been gone? That evening, Hannah called. How are you feeling? I hesitated. Honestly, I feel normal. Silence filled the line. What did you eat yesterday? Chinese takeout. And Vanessa's pie? I froze it. Another pause. Eleanor. I know. No, she said quietly. I don't think you do. Over the next 5 days, I continued the experiment. Every meal Vanessa delivered went into labeled containers. Every cup of herbal tea quietly disappeared down the sink. Every smoothie found its way into the garbage disposal. Instead, I cooked simple meals myself, or ordered food from local restaurants. Each day brought the same unbelievable result. The headaches disappeared, the dizziness vanished, my appetite returned. Most importantly, my memory came back. Passwords I couldn't remember suddenly returned effortlessly. Client names came naturally. Appointments stayed fixed in my mind without endless notes. By the end of the week, there was no denying it anymore. Something had changed. Or rather, someone had been removed from the equation. On Thursday afternoon, I drove to Hannah's house carrying a cooler. Inside were 3 sealed containers: the chicken pot pie, a vegetable soup, and blueberry muffins Vanessa had baked 2 days earlier. Hannah looked at the cooler. You kept everything. I almost threw them away. But you didn't. She took a slow breath. I made a few phone calls. To who? A private laboratory. I stared at her. They can test food samples. My pulse quickened. What if they don't find anything? She smiled softly. Then we'll celebrate. And if they do, she gently placed her hand over mine. Then you'll finally know you were never losing your mind. For the first time in months, I wasn't sure whether I wanted the truth, or whether I was terrified of it. The laboratory sat inside a quiet brick building on the outskirts of Charleston. It looked more like a small medical clinic than a place that could change someone's life forever. I carried the cooler inside with trembling hands. The technician accepted the containers without asking many questions. We'll perform a full analysis, he said. How long will it take? 3 to 5 business days. It sounded like an eternity. As Hannah and I walked back to the parking lot, neither of us spoke. I wanted to believe the results would come back clean. I wanted someone to tell me we'd overreacted. Because if the laboratory found nothing, then maybe the doctors had simply missed something. Maybe there was another explanation. But if they found exactly what Hannah feared, then the woman I called family had been slowly destroying my life. The waiting nearly drove me insane. Every vibration from my phone made my heart race. Every unknown number made my stomach tighten. Meanwhile, I continued avoiding Vanessa's food. She never stopped bringing meals. Lasagna, soup, homemade muffins, fresh fruit smoothies. Each visit looked exactly the same. She smiled. She hugged me. She asked how I was feeling. And every meal went straight into my freezer instead of my stomach. With each passing day, I grew stronger. For the first time in months, I could think clearly. At work, my confidence slowly returned. I finished projects ahead of schedule, remembered every client meeting. Even my employees noticed the difference. Grant noticed the change too. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun disappear over the Ashley River, he reached for my hand. I've missed seeing you smile. So have I. I knew you'd get through this. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to explain why I suddenly felt better. But Hannah had asked me to wait for the laboratory results. Facts, not suspicions. So I simply smiled and squeezed his hand. I hope this lasts. I know it will, he said. Looking back, I wonder if that was the last truly peaceful evening of my life. Monday morning finally arrived. I was reviewing blueprints in my office when my phone rang. An unfamiliar number. My heart immediately started pounding. I answered. Mrs. Whitmore? Yes. This is Dr. Samuel Mercer from Atlantic Diagnostic Laboratories. I gripped the edge of my desk. We've completed the preliminary analysis of the food samples. I couldn't speak. His voice became noticeably more serious. Mrs. Whitmore, are you currently under the care of a physician? Every hair on my body stood up. Yes. I'm going to recommend that you contact your physician immediately. My throat tightened. Why? There was a brief silence. Because what we found is highly unusual. I closed my eyes. What did you find? Our analysis detected repeated traces of toxic heavy metals. For a moment, I couldn't process the words. I'm sorry? We identified elevated levels of arsenic and thallium in multiple food samples. The room went completely silent. He continued carefully. Repeated exposure to these substances can cause memory impairment, confusion, dizziness, nausea, blurred vision, and severe fatigue. He listed every symptom I had been experiencing. Every single one. Then came the sentence that shattered what remained of my world. Long-term exposure can convince physicians that a patient is suffering from a neurological illness. I stopped breathing. I hadn't imagined any of it. I wasn't losing my mind. Someone had been poisoning me. I don't remember leaving my office. Claire later told me I looked as though I'd seen a ghost. The next clear memory I have is pulling into Hannah's driveway. She opened the front door before I even knocked. One look at my face told her everything. She wrapped her arms around me. They found something, didn't they? I could barely speak. They found poison. Saying the word out loud made it real. After I calmed down, Hannah insisted we call Dr. Amelia Grant immediately. To her credit, the doctor didn't dismiss the laboratory report. Instead, she asked me to come in that afternoon. Within an hour, I was sitting in her examination room while she carefully reviewed every page. The color slowly disappeared from her face. I need emergency blood work. Several vials of blood were drawn immediately. Before I left, she looked directly into my eyes. Eleanor, until we know exactly what's happening, do not eat food prepared by anyone except yourself. The seriousness in her voice terrified me. Driving home, I couldn't stop asking myself one question. Why? Why would anyone do something so cruel? Vanessa had never argued with me, never openly hated me, never given me any obvious reason to fear her. Everything about her had always seemed genuine. Was it all an act? Or was there someone else involved? When I walked through the front door, Grant was setting the table. He smiled. Perfect timing. I made reservations for Friday. I looked at him carefully. For the first time since we'd met, I wondered if my husband knew something I didn't. The thought made me sick. Grant noticed my silence. Is everything okay? I almost told him. I almost handed him the laboratory report. But something stopped me. If I was wrong, I'd destroy our marriage with a single accusation. I've just had a long day, I said quietly. He kissed my forehead. We'll get through this. I wanted to believe him. Later that evening, my phone rang again. It was Dr. Amelia Grant. Your blood work is back. I already knew, didn't I? You have elevated levels of both arsenic and thallium. Scientific proof. Not opinions, not assumptions. Evidence. The levels indicate repeated exposure over several months. My knees almost gave way. What happens now? Her answer came without hesitation. I'm reporting this. Reporting it. To law enforcement. The word echoed inside my mind. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was attempted murder. The next morning, Detective Michael Reeves arrived at my home. He was calm, professional, and impossible to read. After introducing himself, he opened a notebook. I need to ask you one question. I nodded. Do you know anyone who might want to harm you? The answer should have been simple. Instead, I found myself thinking about Vanessa. I don't know anymore. He asked who had regular access to my meals. There was only one honest answer. My husband's sister. He listened without interrupting as I described everything. The homemade meals, the herbal teas, the smoothies. The sudden decline in my health. Then I told him about Hannah's experiment, how I stopped eating Vanessa's food, how every symptom disappeared. Detective Reeves quietly wrote notes before looking up. That's important. Then he surprised me. Does your husband know you've stopped eating her food? No. Does he know about the laboratory results? No. He nodded. Good. I frowned. Why good? If someone has been poisoning you, the last thing we want is for that person to know we've discovered it. A chill ran through me. What if it isn't Vanessa? Then we'll find out. And if it is? She'll eventually make a mistake. Before leaving, Detective Reeves gave me 3 instructions. Do not confront anyone. Prepare every meal yourself. And act as though nothing has changed. I blinked. You want me to pretend I'm still getting worse? Yes. Why? Because people who believe they're succeeding become careless. After he left, I stood alone in front of my bathroom mirror. I practiced looking confused, pretended to search for words, even rehearsed forgetting where I'd left my phone. It felt ridiculous. But if pretending could expose the truth, I would do it. That evening, right on schedule, Vanessa arrived carrying another casserole. She smiled exactly as she always had. I made your favorite. For the first time, I looked into her eyes and wondered how many times she had watched me eat, knowing exactly what she had put into my food. I smiled back, thanked her, accepted the dish, and silently promised myself one thing. No matter how painful the truth turned out to be, I would uncover it. The hardest part of the investigation wasn't pretending to forget things. It was pretending to trust the woman who had almost destroyed my life. Every smile I gave Vanessa felt forced. Every hug made my skin crawl. Every time she placed another homemade meal into my hands, I had to remind myself not to let my fear show. Detective Reeves had been clear. If she realizes you know the truth, she'll destroy evidence. So I smiled. I thanked her. And the moment she left, every container of food went into my freezer as evidence. The woman who believed she was winning had no idea she was slowly building the case against herself. A few days later, Detective Reeves called. I need you to come to the station. His tone told me this wasn't routine. When I arrived, he spread several photographs across the table. They showed Vanessa unlocking a storage unit on the outskirts of Charleston. In one picture, she was carrying cardboard boxes. In another, she walked out holding a small insulated bag, almost identical to the ones she used whenever she brought food to my house. We've had surveillance on her for 3 days, he explained. She visits this storage unit regularly. What do you think she's keeping there? I asked. We don't guess, he replied calmly. We collect evidence. That answer somehow made me feel both hopeful and terrified. Before I left, Detective Reeves asked another question. Have you noticed any recent changes in Vanessa's behavior? I thought about it for a moment. She's asking more questions. What kind of questions? She keeps asking whether I'm feeling better. And when I tell her I am, she looks disappointed. He nodded slowly and wrote something in his notebook. Keep answering exactly the way you have been. I will. But don't let your guard down. That afternoon, I met with my attorney, Richard Collins. There was something Detective Reeves couldn't answer. If someone wanted me declared mentally incompetent, what exactly would they gain? Richard had handled my legal affairs for nearly 20 years. When I placed the laboratory report on his desk, he stared at it in disbelief. My God, Eleanor. I wish it weren't true. I took a deep breath. I need you to tell me something. Anything. If I died today, who inherits everything? Richard opened my estate file. Your husband would inherit the majority of your personal assets. I expected that. Then he continued. Your parents' family trust remains separate. I nodded. The trust contained investment properties, stocks, and family assets accumulated over generations. Only a handful of people even knew it existed. Richard's expression suddenly changed. Eleanor, someone recently requested information about that trust. My heart skipped. What? He turned his monitor toward me. About 6 weeks ago. Who? The request appeared to come from Grant. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. No. There must be some mistake. I thought so too. He opened another file. There were multiple requests. Questions about mental incapacity, conservatorship, and procedures for transferring financial control if a spouse became legally incompetent. The room spun. It felt as though the floor had disappeared beneath me. What's a conservator? I asked quietly. If a court decides someone can no longer manage their own affairs, Richard explained, another person can be appointed to control their finances. I stared at him. You mean someone could control everything I own? If you were declared mentally unfit. Suddenly everything Detective Reeves had said made sense. Someone wasn't trying to kill me quickly. Someone wanted the world to believe I was losing my mind first. I left Richard's office in a daze. Sitting in my car, I cried harder than I had in months. The poisoning, the memory loss, the repeated conversations about stress and dementia, the trust, the conservatorship. They all pointed toward one horrifying possibility. Someone had a plan, and that plan required me to appear mentally unstable. But another question now haunted me. Had Grant been part of it? Or had someone used his trust against him? I desperately wanted to believe my husband was innocent. Yet doubt had already planted its roots. That evening, Grant came home carrying a bouquet of white lilies. My favorite flowers. I thought these might cheer you up, he said with a smile. I looked at him for a long moment. The same gentle eyes, the same warm smile, the same man I'd loved for years. Had any of it been real? He noticed my silence. Everything okay? I'm just tired. He kissed my forehead. We'll get through this. His words almost broke me. Because I wanted to believe them more than anything. Later that night, my phone rang. It was Detective Reeves. We've analyzed another food sample. And? It contains the same toxic compounds. I closed my eyes. Another confirmation. Another piece of evidence. We're getting closer. Closer to what? To proving exactly who put it there. The following morning, I returned to the police station. This time, Detective Reeves wasn't alone. A financial crimes investigator joined us. He slid a folder across the table. We've been reviewing Vanessa's finances. Inside were loan documents, credit reports, collection notices. I looked up. She was in debt? The investigator nodded. Just over $1.8 million. I stared at him in disbelief. How? Failed investments, luxury boutiques, vacation rentals, a cosmetics franchise. Every business she'd started had collapsed. She had borrowed more money trying to save the previous one until she was drowning in debt. She wasn't just struggling, Detective Reeves said quietly. She was desperate. For the first time, the motive became painfully clear. When I arrived home, Hannah was waiting for me. The moment she saw my face, she knew something had changed. What happened? I told her everything. Vanessa's debt, the trust documents, the conservatorship research. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, tears filled her eyes. I'm so sorry. So am I. I keep hoping there's another explanation. So do I. She hesitated before asking the question we had both been avoiding. What about Grant? I honestly don't know. And that's what's killing me. That evening, after Grant went upstairs, I quietly walked into our home office. I hated myself for what I was about to do, but I needed answers. I carefully searched through the desk we shared: tax files, client folders, insurance papers. Everything looked normal. Then I opened the bottom drawer. Inside lay several printed emails. One subject line immediately caught my attention: estate planning questions. My pulse quickened. The emails had been sent from Grant's account to Richard's law office. The questions were short. If my spouse becomes mentally incompetent, what happens to trust assets? How quickly can a conservatorship be approved? I felt physically sick. Had Grant written them? Or had someone else? I didn't know. I placed every document exactly where I had found it and quietly left the office. That night, as Grant slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I no longer knew who I could trust. One person had poisoned me. Another person might have been helping, or might have been completely innocent. I simply didn't know which possibility frightened me more. The next morning, Detective Reeves called before sunrise. His voice was calm. "We've received judicial authorization." "For what?" "To place Vanessa under full surveillance." I sat upright in bed. "Do you think she'll lead you to something?" "I think people who believe they're winning eventually stop being careful." He paused. "And when they do, they usually expose themselves." For the first time since this nightmare began, I realized the truth wasn't far away anymore. Someone's carefully constructed lies were about to collapse. I just didn't know whose life would be destroyed when they did. The next week felt longer than the previous 7 months combined. Every day I waited for Detective Reeves to call. Every night I wondered if Vanessa somehow knew the truth. She still came by with food. She still hugged me. She still looked at me with those soft, sympathetic eyes that had once brought me comfort. Now I knew better. Those eyes weren't filled with compassion. They were watching, measuring, waiting to see whether her plan was working. I often caught her studying my face. "Are you feeling any better?" she would ask. I always gave the same answer. Some days are good, some days aren't. It was enough to satisfy her, at least for the moment. But every lie I told made me hate this game a little more. 3 days into the surveillance, Detective Reeves called. "We need to meet." His voice carried a quiet urgency. When I arrived at the station, several photographs were already spread across his desk. Vanessa appeared in every one of them, entering the storage facility, leaving with boxes, carrying insulated bags, making phone calls from inside her car before driving away. Then he pointed to another photograph. We also followed her to a cash transaction. "How much?" $25,000. "To who?" "We're still tracing it." He folded his hands. "But we believe we're getting close." I stared at the photographs. The woman smiling in those pictures looked nothing like the sister-in-law I thought I knew. She looked cautious, secretive, almost professional. Then Detective Reeves asked the question I wasn't expecting. "Has Vanessa invited you to dinner recently?" I nodded. "This Saturday." He looked at me for several seconds. "We'd like you to go." My heart immediately began racing. "No, I can't. You won't be alone. I don't care. What if she serves me poisoned food again? You won't eat it." He leaned forward. "We believe this may be the best opportunity we'll get." "The best opportunity for what?" "To catch her in the act." The words echoed inside my head all the way home. Friday evening, Hannah came over. She found me sitting on the back porch, staring across the Ashley River. "You don't have to do this," she said gently. "Yes, I do. What if something goes wrong?" I looked at her. For months I believed I was losing my mind. If I walk away now, she wins. Hannah reached over and hugged me tightly. "Then promise me one thing." "What?" "Come back." I smiled through tears. "I intend to." Saturday arrived under dark gray skies. Grant seemed unusually cheerful. "It'll be nice to spend time with Vanessa," I forced a smile. "I hope so." As we drove to her house, my heart refused to slow down. Every mile felt heavier than the last. When we pulled into the driveway, Vanessa opened the front door before we even knocked. "There you are." She hugged Grant first, then wrapped her arms around me. For one brief second, I froze. The perfume, the warm smile, the familiar voice. If I didn't know the truth, I would have believed every bit of it. Inside, everything looked beautiful. Candles glowed across the dining table. Soft jazz floated through the house. Fresh flowers decorated every room. It looked like the perfect family dinner, which somehow made it even more disturbing. While Grant opened a bottle of wine, Vanessa and I found ourselves alone. She smiled. You look better. I've been feeling stronger. For the smallest fraction of a second. Her smile slipped. So you've changed something? I laughed lightly. I'm trying to sleep more. She held my gaze just a little too long before smiling again. That's wonderful. But her eyes said something different. They weren't relieved. They were calculating. Dinner was finally ready. Just as always, Vanessa insisted on serving everyone's plates herself. Grant received his plate first. Then she disappeared into the kitchen before returning with mine. As she placed it in front of me, something caught my attention. A tiny blue mark underneath the edge of my plate. Barely visible. I casually looked at Grant's plate. No mark. Then at Vanessa's. Nothing. Only mine. A cold chill spread through my body. She had marked the plate, so she would never accidentally give it to someone else. She smiled warmly. I made your favorite lemon herb chicken. I smiled back. Thank you. Inside, my heart was pounding. I picked up my fork and cut a small piece of chicken. Vanessa watched me, not casually, intently, almost eagerly. Just as I lifted the fork, my phone rang. The sound startled everyone. I looked at the screen. Detective Reeves. Exactly as planned. I'm sorry, I said. I need to take this. Vanessa nodded politely, though I caught a flash of irritation before it disappeared. I stepped onto the back patio. Mrs. Whitmore, Detective Reeves said quietly. Our team is in position. I looked through the kitchen window. Vanessa was smiling at Grant. She looked perfectly relaxed. Then Detective Reeves spoke again. We've executed the search warrant. My grip tightened around the phone. What did you find? His next words made my knees weak. We located laboratory-grade chemical compounds. I closed my eyes. And a journal. A journal? It contains handwritten entries. He paused. Your name appears throughout it. The world seemed to stop. What kind of entries? Dates? Meals? Symptoms? Dosages? I leaned against the railing. She hadn't simply poisoned me. She had documented every step, like I was part of an experiment. We're moving in now, Detective Reeves said. Go back inside. Stay calm. We'll take it from here. When I returned to the table, Vanessa smiled. Everything okay? Just business. She seemed satisfied. Dinner continued. Or at least, everyone pretended it did. Every few minutes, she glanced at my plate. Not Grant's. Not her own. Mine. Waiting. Watching. Making sure I ate. I quietly moved food around with my fork but never swallowed a bite. Grant noticed. You're barely eating. My stomach feels a little unsettled. Vanessa immediately leaned forward. That's probably your anxiety again. Anxiety. There it was. The same excuse she'd been feeding everyone for months. Except now, I knew why. If everyone believed I was mentally unstable, no one would question the real cause. 30 minutes later, someone knocked on the front door. Grant frowned. Were you expecting anyone? No, Vanessa answered. Another knock. Louder this time. She walked toward the entrance. The moment she opened the door, everything changed. Charleston Police Department. Detective Michael Reeves stepped inside with 2 uniformed officers. Vanessa's smile vanished. There must be some mistake. We'll determine that, Detective Reeves replied calmly. The officers spread through the house. One entered the kitchen. Another disappeared down the hallway. Grant stood frozen. What is happening? No one answered immediately. Several tense minutes later, one officer returned carrying a small glass jar. It was hidden behind the flour container. Detective Reeves examined it carefully before looking directly at Vanessa. This container tested positive for arsenic. Silence. Complete silence. Vanessa's face turned white. I've never seen that before. I expected you might say that. Detective Reeves opened his briefcase. One by one, he placed photographs on the dining table. The storage unit, the chemical bottles, the dosage notes. Then finally, the journal. He opened it. The first page listed dates. The second listed meals. The third documented my symptoms. Memory loss increasing. Doctor still suspects stress. Increase dosage carefully. I felt sick. Every terrifying moment I'd lived through had been carefully recorded. Grant stared at the pages in disbelief. Vanessa, his voice cracked. What have you done? For the first time since I'd known her, she didn't smile. She didn't pretend. The mask was gone. What remained was pure hatred. Detective Reeves closed the journal. Vanessa Whitmore, You're under arrest for the attempted murder of Eleanor Whitmore. The handcuffs clicked shut. As the officers led her toward the door, she stopped and looked directly at me. Her eyes were cold, empty, filled with years of resentment I had never seen. Then she whispered words I will never forget. You were never supposed to figure it out. The front door closed behind her. The nightmare that had stolen months of my life was finally over. Or so I thought. Because there was still one question left unanswered. The question that mattered more than any other. Was my husband another victim of his sister's lies? Or had my marriage been built on a betrayal I still hadn't uncovered? By the time Detective Reeves called me back to the station, I already knew my life would never be the same again. But I still didn't know whether my husband belonged beside me, or beside his sister. That question haunted me more than everything else. Because as much as Vanessa had betrayed me, I couldn't bear the thought that the man I loved had looked into my eyes every day while helping destroy my life. When I arrived, Detective Reeves closed the office door before speaking. We've completed the forensic investigation. I held my breath. What about Grant? The detective opened a thick folder. The emails requesting information about your trust and conservatorship did come from Grant's laptop. My stomach dropped. But that single word stopped me from falling apart. The messages were sent while Grant was attending a financial conference in Atlanta. He slid hotel records, airline tickets, conference registrations, and security logs across the desk. Everything confirmed the same thing. Grant wasn't even in Charleston when those emails were sent. So who sent them? We believe Vanessa. Months earlier, she had borrowed Grant's laptop after claiming hers had stopped working. She had spent nearly an hour alone in our home office. At the time, neither of us thought anything of it. Now it made perfect sense. She had accessed his saved passwords and quietly used his identity whenever she needed it. What about his finances? I asked quietly. We found no transfers, no hidden accounts, no insurance policies, no payments, no evidence that Grant gained anything from what happened to you. I slowly closed my eyes. Relief washed over me. But it wasn't complete. Because although my husband hadn't poisoned me, he hadn't believed me either. Sometimes betrayal doesn't come from evil. Sometimes it comes from choosing the wrong person. Detective Reeves handed me another file. This is the last thing. Inside was Vanessa's journal. Nearly 200 handwritten pages. I forced myself to read. Grant says she forgot another meeting today. Doctor still believes it's stress. Need to increase dosage slowly. She's beginning to doubt herself. My hands started shaking. To Vanessa, I wasn't a sister. I wasn't family. I was an experiment. The final pages finally explained why. Money wasn't the beginning. It was only the reward. Vanessa had spent years believing I stole her brother from her. She hated that Grant spent holidays with me instead of her. She hated watching my business grow while every investment she made collapsed. She hated hearing relatives praise my success. Eventually, jealousy became resentment. Resentment became obsession. And obsession became attempted murder. She convinced herself that I didn't deserve the life I had built. If she couldn't have it, neither could I. 3 months later, she accepted a plea agreement rather than face trial. The laboratory reports, the blood tests, the surveillance, the chemicals found in her storage unit, her own journal, there was simply no defense. She received a lengthy prison sentence. The reporters wanted interviews. Television stations wanted statements. I refused all of them. I had spent enough time with strangers discussing my life. I wanted peace, not publicity. Grant moved out a few weeks later, not because I demanded it, because we both understood that some things cannot survive, even when no crime was committed. The night he collected his last box, he stood quietly in our living room. I'm sorry, he whispered. I know. I should have believed you. Yes, I answered honestly. You should have. Tears filled his eyes. I thought my sister was helping. I know. I'll regret that for the rest of my life. So will I. There was no screaming, no blame, just 2 broken people standing inside a house that no longer felt like home. He picked up the box, walked to the front door, turned once as though he wanted to say something else, then quietly left. That was the last time I ever saw my husband. Recovery wasn't immediate. The poison had been inside my body for months. Doctors monitored my blood regularly. The fear that had followed me every waking moment finally faded. Almost a year after the investigation began, I returned to my office full-time. When I walked through the front doors, every employee was waiting. Flowers covered my desk. A handwritten card sat beside them. It simply read, "Welcome back, Eleanor." I cried before I reached my chair. Not because I was remembering everything I had lost, but because I finally understood everything I had survived. Today, my company is stronger than it has ever been. We've expanded beyond Charleston into Savannah, Charlotte, and Asheville, restoring historic homes that remind me every day that even badly damaged things can be rebuilt with enough patience and care. People often ask whether I still trust others. The truth is, trust comes more slowly now. But fear no longer controls me, because surviving taught me something far more valuable. When everyone tells you that your instincts are wrong, listen to them anyway. If Hannah hadn't asked one simple question, if Dr. Amelia Grant hadn't looked beyond stress, if Detective Michael Reeves hadn't followed evidence instead of assumptions, I would probably have spent the rest of my life believing I was mentally ill. Instead, I learned the truth. I was never losing my mind. Someone was trying to steal it, but they failed. They didn't steal my business. They didn't steal my fortune. They didn't steal my future. The only thing they lost was their freedom. Every morning now, when I wake up with a clear mind and another chance to live, I'm reminded that the greatest victory isn't revenge. It isn't wealth. It isn't even justice. It's discovering the truth before it's too late. And if this story teaches anything, let it be this. The most dangerous enemies rarely announce themselves. Sometimes they bring flowers, sometimes they bring homemade soup, and sometimes they call themselves family. Before you go, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What was the biggest red flag you noticed before Eleanor discovered the truth? Share your answer and where you're watching from in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more emotional stories of betrayal, resilience, justice, and hope. Until next time, take care of yourself, trust your instincts, and remember, sometimes the people who save us are simply the ones who choose to believe us.